Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang, currently sheltering in place in San Francisco. Markets ending the day in positive territory for another day, despite cautious comments from the Fed. This as more countries around the world are taking small steps toward reopening their economy. Meantime, Disney shares down after hours after reporting their second quarter results. Of course, Disney exposed on multiple fronts with theme parks closed around the world. Of course, they also own ESPN. Live sports have been canceled, and movie theaters also shut down. Joining me now, Eric Hagstrom, analyst at eMarketer, to help us break it all down. The big headline here, Eric, is that Disney is now saying they're planning to reopen Shanghai Disneyland on May 11th. That's certainly a big symbolic step, even though other parks will remain closed around the world. What's your headline takeaway from these results?
Well, Disney's willing to open up these parks early in order to preserve revenue. But Shanghai Disneyland is a relatively small part of their overall parks business, and their parks business in the U.S. still remains closed and likely will remain closed, or at least seeing significantly reduced revenue for the foreseeable future.
Meantime, let's talk a little bit about the other parts of the results here. Of course, you've got movies, you've got ESPN, you've got Disney Plus, which is really the bright spot. The company saying at the end of the quarter they had 33.5 million subscribers, but we know in April they released an even more updated number that they had surpassed 50 million subscribers. You know, walk us through how much Disney Plus can buoy them through this time.
Well, the Disney Plus news is certainly fantastic. Looking back to when they announced Disney Plus back in 2019, they gave a guidance of about 60 million to 90 million worldwide subscribers by the end of 2024. They're already approaching that guidance fairly quickly in mid or early 2020. That being said, Disney Plus doesn't exist in a vacuum. A lot of the growth, or a lot of the reason why they're going direct to consumer with Disney Plus is to help supercharge other parts of their business, namely their parks and their movies business, which remains closed right now. So while the growth is very impressive, it is a little bittersweet.
So talk to us about how movie theaters remaining closed drags on the bottom line. Of course, we saw, the film studio, not a great quarter, not unexpectedly, but still buoyed by Frozen 2, which opened early in the quarter, a new Star Wars movie, but that's not going to happen for the current quarter.
Well, it's important to realize when we look at the Q1 results, or the Q1 calendar year 2020 results, is that the impacts in the U.S. didn't hit until the very end of March. So when we look to Q2 2020 calendar year, when we look towards the rest of 2020 and even into 2021, movies and theme parks are likely to remain closed. Disney really is dependent on these large tentpole movies. They've done fantastic at the box office the past couple years, but again, they won't be able to show these movies or expect the same sort of revenues from these movies when a significant amount of the movie theaters in the country are closed or have drastically limited capacity.
Meantime, just before the COVID-19 crisis came to the United States, you had Disney announcing that Bob Iger was stepping down, moving into the chairman role, and Bob Chapek, who had been running the parks division, was stepping into the CEO role. So certainly huge job on Chapek's plate, though. Iger, of course, still there and seems to be still involved. But, what does a new CEO do in a crisis like this, especially given a really uncertain year ahead?
Well, it's certainly a trial by fire for Bob Chapek, but it's important to remember that Bob Iger is still very much in the fold and is still running a significant amount of the business. And at the same time, Disney has the strongest set of IP in the industry. People really associate with and love their various, hits such as, Star Wars, Marvel, the various Disney properties, Pixar. So that is a large bright spot. So when the pandemic subsides and we see either a vaccine or a treatment of some sort, they're in a really good position to rebound, both at the parks and both, across their various media businesses.
Right. The big question is when the pandemic recedes. Thank you so much, Eric Hagstrom of eMarketer. Appreciate it. Coming up, we're going to be talking about Xbox, the pandemic not stopping Microsoft's Xbox from releasing new games and consoles to keep people entertained through this crisis. We're going to hear from the head of Xbox, Phil Spencer, coming up. This is Bloomberg. On to gaming. Microsoft's Xbox is moving on to what will be probably its biggest launch year yet for products and services. I spoke to Microsoft's head of Xbox, Phil Spencer, about the coming lineup, which he says is still on track for the rest of this year, and how much activity they expect to see amidst a pandemic.
We're seeing just incredible engagement with the games, with the services, people sheltering in place, work from home, school at home, and people are finding gaming as just a really collaborative and social outlet for the time that they have. And it sets up, I think, for a really exciting year for us.
So how do you balance showcasing all the products and games you have coming up and also striking the right tone, given that we are in the middle of a pandemic and a massive economic crisis?
For us, it's core that we stay close to our values as a team and as a company. We're about empowering every person on the planet to achieve more. And we think people are doing that through gaming today, just the needs that they have. When people are physically distanced from their friends and their family, the fact that our gaming services and our gaming content can help people stay connected to their friends. The last couple of months, we've seen 23 million new friend connections created on Xbox Live. The communities come together in our gaming subscription and Game Pass, playing new games. And the fact that our services can help bring people together at a time of need really, drives us as a team.
Obviously, we're seeing rising unemployment and people really struggling. Do you think that means fewer people are going to buy consoles this year? And what does that mean for your business and your business model?
Yeah, clearly gaming is a discretionary activity. And I think it's really important at a time of need like this that families are taking care of the most important things for them. Gaming tends to be a really good value. We've looked at, the 2008, 2009, what happened in the gaming business. Software and services, gaming content tends to do okay. Because I think when families are looking at cost-effective ways to pass the time together, gaming is clearly one of those. Now, buying hardware could be impacted. Hardware for us is a long-term endeavor. We ship an Xbox console. We're shipping our Xbox Series X this year. Very excited about it. But that's a console that will be in market for years. So when we look at the launch of it this year, we'll introduce it, and families will make the decisions that they need to go make. The thing that I love is we're going to have thousands of games for people to go play, safe and up services for people to go use, and they'll make the decisions when it's right for them.
Now, you're sheltering in place, Microsoft employees are sheltering in place, and you're working with so many different game studios that are all facing different circumstances. How concerned are you about the games being ready? Like, will Halo, your most popular game, will that be ready?
Yeah, the safety and security of the team's ultimately important. There's no doubt about that, and nothing's more important than that. You're absolutely right. Building video games in these day and ages, hundreds of people working on games together over multiple years. It's just a very complicated intersection of technology and art coming together to create today's great games. Halo is an important game for us. Halo Infinite's one of our games. We expect to be there this year with the launch of the new console. But we're taking it day by day. Every day the teams are learning, what does it mean to work from home? For me, this is my 9th week working from home. It's kind of hard to believe. Our teams have kind of hit a rhythm now. Certain things are maybe even a little bit easier in working from home. Other things are more difficult. And frankly, we have team members that have kids at home. So it's being there for our teams when they're making the balanced life trade-offs that they need to make is the most important thing. But I feel good about game production. Certain parts of it are sticky, but the teams are driven, and we feel really good about the path we're on.
Speaking of kids, video games have been a lifeline they are a lifeline for so many people in general, but for kids at this time, my son just started playing Minecraft while we've been sheltering in place. And I know that you've been thinking about diversity and building that not just into the team, but into the content. How can I feel good as a parent about the time that he's spending on there and making sure that that's productive time and that he's that, learning good things about social norms rather than the opposite.
Yeah, it's such a great and important topic. Minecraft's one of our games, and we take the responsibility of potentially being many children's first on-road into what does it mean to be online, what does it mean to interact with other people online, what are the social norms and etiquette that I should have. And it's a core principle for us with Team Xbox, and something that we focus a ton on. For you as a parent and for the other parents out there, understand what your kids are playing, get involved in it. Use the parental controls that are available on the platforms that you're playing on to make sure that you understand who they're interacting with online, how many hours they're playing. Being in control of this, being a participant is something that's very important. One of the things, there's a couple of things we did this year, but one of them is Xbox Game Pass, which is the subscription that's come out that's given families hundreds of games that they can play for a set monthly amount. It's not really an ad for Game Pass, but one of the things it has done is it's actually brought opportunities for families to play games together. And it's one of the things when parents ask me, I would definitely recommend that parents sit down, put a controller in their hand, and figure out what this gaming thing is about. I don't know that they'll turn into the same gamer that their kids are playing as their kids, but definitely be aware of the content and what's there. And there are services out there that can give you access to a lot of games to go try with your family.
Phil Spencer there, head of Microsoft Xbox. Meantime, Airbnb announced it is cutting 25% of its workforce around the world. In an email from CEO Brian Chesky, Chesky also said the company's revenue this year would be half of what it was last year, and that 1,900 employees worldwide would be affected by this. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Olivia Carville, who's been covering this. Olivia, obviously these layoffs around the world are devastating, and certainly so at Airbnb. Tell us a little bit more about who which jobs are going to be affected and what Chesky had to say.
Right. Well, coronavirus has really been hammering the travel sector lately. We saw TripAdvisor laying off 25% of its workforce last week, and now Airbnb today. In Chesky's email to all staff, he said that collectively they were all living through the most harrowing crisis of their lifetime, and it's just brought global travel to a total standstill. In response to this, Airbnb's raised $2 billion in capital. It's dramatically cut costs across the company. But Chesky said that he realized he would need to lay off staff when he realized he didn't know when travel would return, and that when it does return, that it's going to look totally different. So we don't actually know where these jobs are going to be cut from, but he has said in this note to all staff that the company will be reducing its investments in luxury travel and in the hotel sector.
He also said that it felt like a torpedo had just hit the ship, and talked about how Airbnb now has to get back to its roots, because if and when the travel industry does recover, people are going to want to stay closer to home and not spend as much. What does that strategy, a narrower strategy, mean for a company that was planning to go public this year?
Yeah, I mean, their public market debut has been totally thrown into jeopardy here with the virus. And I think this is about Airbnb really trying to focus back on what made it so special in the first place, which is the everyday person who wants to rent out their home to a traveler. So the company had been diversifying and getting into transportation and content with a new magazine and, hotels, and buying Hotel Tonight a few years ago, and then also branching out into luxury travel. And now from Chesky's note, it looks like the company is really trying to get back to its roots. He's saying that he wants to go back to the basics, to what was truly special about Airbnb in the first place. And he said it's those everyday people who host their homes.
Right. All right. A story we'll continue to follow. Bloomberg's Olivia Carville, thank you for that update. Meantime, our exclusive interview with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek. What's on his pandemic playlist, and what's he betting on to grow the world's biggest music streaming platform even bigger? That's coming up. This is Bloomberg. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit the music industry hard, canceling production, halting live concerts. I sat down for an exclusive and wide-ranging interview with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek. We talked about how his home country, Sweden, is handling the crisis and what it means for Spotify now and going forward.
It's a little bit different than perhaps many other places in and around the world, in that the Swedish government chose a very different way of doing it, in that it's really not mandated social distancing. It's more a recommendation of a social distancing. So all the stores are still open, all the restaurants are still open.
And
but
that's
you're
been kind of
encouraged.
controversial. That's been kind of controversial, right?
It's been very controversial, and it's been widely reported by everyone from President Trump to world leaders around the world of what are these crazy Swedes doing. And yeah, I mean, it's been widely debated in Sweden too. But so far, at least, we're clearly impacted. But it's a sensitive time, but I feel pretty good about where we are right now.
We've been listening to a lot of Spotify Kids stuck inside. What's on your
Fantastic.
pandemic playlist? I know you got kids too.
Yeah. So on our playlist right now, it's obviously a lot of Frozen and the Trolls soundtrack.
Okay, you
So
too. Okay.
yes, definitely going on at our house. And so I'm actually very happy that Trolls managed to get their movie up on Apple TV so that we could rent it and get it out there. Because otherwise, it was something our kids were looking forward to for a long, long time.
So what is it like running a $26 billion company in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, the crazy thing, I think, for us is just how global the business is. So, we're in close to 80 countries around the world. So we're dealing with all these various stages of the pandemic. You have Asia, which is making a near recovery. You had Europe, that's right in the epicenter and was in the epicenter since early March. You have the US, which is kind of right now in the middle of the epicenter, and you have LATAM that will probably enter the epicenter shortly. So we're all in different stages of this epidemic. And what's just fascinating for me has been just seeing how the consumption habits have just shifted overnight. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this since the inception of the company, of just how people changed habits, changed what they're listening to, how they're engaging with that content. So it's just really been responding to this new reality that we're living in, while at the same time making it culturally appropriate.
You now have 286 million users, 130 million paying subscribers in 79 markets. How do you expect listening to shift over the next few months?
We've actually been seeing an influx of new users coming to the service, including, which we're very happy about, old users returning to the platform. But I think it's hard to say. I mean, obviously, my guess will be as good as anyone's about when this will change and how quickly things can turn back into normal. For us specifically, the big thing is really around the commute. So to the point when people are starting to return back to their offices, their place of work, I suspect we're going to see something that looks a lot more like normalcy for us. Also, second big thing for us is just the gym. People are listening a lot to music while working out. Again, people are working out, but not going to the gym so much. So that's impacting the type of music that people are listening to as well. So I suspect as we're seeing places of work opening up and gyms opening up, I think we as a company will be a lot more like normal again.
Now, this has really been hard on the music industry. I know, there haven't been any live concerts. You've got John Legend doing home concerts, Selena Gomez Instagramming her home studio. But just how hard do you think the music industry itself will be hit by this?
Oh, it's absolutely going to be massive, specifically for artists themselves. So if you look at an average artist today, about 80% of their income comes from touring. So the fact that they can't tour and likely won't be able to tour for much of the summer, which is one of the greatest points for concerts as well, will impact many, many musicians a lot. And not just that, but we're talking about all the roadies and everyone else that makes these concerts happen. So it's a big thing, and it's something that we as a company are very focused on, and why we also created the COVID-19 relief fund, where we want to match donations um, towards the music industry.
Even in the midst of this, you're still running a business and you have to, map out various scenarios and look ahead. So every quarter, I know you create internally what's called a bets board, where you list your priorities for the quarter, and these are selected from proposals from your team. So what's on your bets board right now?
Well, the number one thing on our bets board is actually something that's stayed the same for a very long time, and that's just our bet from going from a music company to an audio company. We went about a year ago, just to put it in perspective, we were at about 250,000 podcasts, and we just passed over 1 million. Of that, about 60% of all podcasts are now being produced and distributed via Anchor, which is one of our acquisitions last year. So we're really just making progress on making it easier for people to create podcasts, distribute their podcasts, but also improving the consumption experience across the board. That's kind of our main focus, and has been for quite some time.
Up next, more of my interview with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek. Currently, the company gives the majority of its revenues back to the music industry. What's the path to stronger profits? We'll talk about that next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Earlier this hour, we got insight into how listening trends are shifting on Spotify in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. In part two of my exclusive interview with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek, we talk about how the music industry will survive such massive disruption, with production halted, live concerts canceled, and artists struggling. Take a listen.
I think the most important thing is we tend to look at things as zero-sum games, and that's just not my approach to a lot of these problems. So when you look at the music industry, I think it's very important that many people make this distinction between the labels against Spotify, but that's not how I look at it. There's still a lot of inefficiencies in the business for everyone. So if you just take it through from an artist vantage point, an artist now creates a piece of music. It used to be that one of the most expensive things was around distributing that music, pressing the CDs, getting it out to the retailers, making it heard. And that was a huge part of the risk that the record company used to take. Nowadays, one of the biggest risks is in marketing that record, because it's harder and harder to get heard in the world, and labels are spending a lot of money promoting music and getting it out there in the world. And that's something, as an example, that I think we can make a huge difference in just making that whole process a lot more efficient. And in doing so, we can make it so that this becomes a better enterprise for labels, but we can also, of course, make it a very lucrative business opportunity for us to pursue that.
Now, a lot has been made of Spotify's relationship with the music industry, and the stories that have exploded are, Taylor Swift pulling her music off Spotify. Of course, it's back on there. Or Beyonce putting her album exclusively on a competing service. How would you describe your relationship with the music industry today? Is it better or worse than it was, and why?
Well, I think it's just night and day compared to when we started. Just 10 years ago, much of what I spent every single day about was just educating people about what streaming was. And the largest point was just the lack of imagining that this could be the future. So a lot of the things we were dealing with was, why would I want to do this? I want to own my music. This feeling of needing to own my music was the prevalent feeling. So no one even thought streaming could be a major source of revenue, let alone the biggest source of revenue. And so a lot of that was just educating the whole industry about that shift. Obviously, now we live in a world where streaming is not only, the largest revenue source for the music industry, but is now over half of all the revenue for the entire music industry. And so people aren't talking about that. Now people are talking instead about, okay, well, what does that mean? And when have we reached saturation of the music industry? And what will the whole industry look like? And how many will it support once we're at that stage? So it's a very different discussion than what we had 10 years ago. And a lot of the things you referenced were in that build-up phase when people were unsure whether streaming was something that was net positive for the industry. And I think people realized that streaming is here to stay. It is a significant driver to the music industry, and the music industry itself has been growing because of streaming.
You're also working on this long-term bet, which is your two-sided marketplace and allowing artists to pay to promote their music on the platform. How much do artists spend promoting new releases on Spotify? I know The Weeknd just paid to have his album promoted on Spotify, and
Right.
How much revenue do you think that can drive?
Well, over time, we think it's a significant revenue opportunity for Spotify and for the music industry. And when you think about it right now, as I mentioned, a huge barrier for a lot of artists today is just the ability for them to market their music in an efficient way. And so either you have to be signed to a major label and you have to be on that level where someone at that company trusts that this will be a big thing and they're going to bet the farm on making that happen. But it's getting harder and harder to do that. And we want to democratize the process so that everyone can do it, and that there's a lot more efficient ways where you can measure the ROI of that spend in a bigger way. Today we're early in that journey. We've been talking about it for quite some time now, but we're still very, very early in that journey. But over time, we think this will be a major driver of our business and the increase in our future profitability.
So about 60 million people in the US pay for a streaming service. How big do you think that number can get? And what do you think Spotify's share will be?
Well, globally, we talk about the fact that we think this is an opportunity in the billions. Again, we don't put a ton of emphasis on how people are paying, whether they're paying through being on the ad-funded environment or the subscription-funded. And let me just put a perspective on that. So it's obvious today that the music industry focuses on paid subscription. But when I look at even all of the paid subscriptions combined today, I think IFPI has that number at, call it $12 billion or something equivalent. And then you look at radio, and in the US, the US radio industry, I believe this is probably 2017 or 2018 numbers, so it's a little bit outdated, but the entire US radio industry on just the ad side was $18 billion. So that's larger than the entire streaming industry is for the music industry. So in the future, I think the right metric to focus on isn't just the number of paid subscribers, but it's how many people do we have in in a legal environment where it's being monetized for the music industry. And I think the combination of ad-supported and subscription and probably a la carte models as well, it's those three things that will drive the future of the music industry.
The US and Europe still make up close to 70% of Spotify subscribers, but that share is declining as you grow internationally. How do you see the mix shifting, and what's the most important market for you, let's say, in the next year?
Well, the fastest growing and of the largest size is LATAM right now for us. So we're very, very excited about all the progress we're making in LATAM. It's super fun to see just how people are engaging with it, how crazy they are, the Brazilians, the Mexicans, and everyone about music in general and Spotify in particular. So that's fun, but it's also a lot of fun because we can see things like reggaeton, which used to be a local occurrence, now being a global phenomenon as well. And it's fun to see how Latin artists now are crossing over to becoming global artists in a big way. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's due to how much streaming has been growing in LATAM. And we're, of course, investing very heavily in that trend, and we're very excited about it.
You're not in Korea yet, which is one of the biggest music markets, and there are a lot of local competitors. I'm sure you can still get a healthy dose of K-pop on Spotify, but when will we see you there?
Well, it's one of the markets that we have as a priority market, so hopefully we can launch there soon. As you mentioned, it's one of the biggest music markets in the world, but it's also a very vibrant community. You have BTS, of course, being a worldwide phenomenon now, but we're very excited about the opportunity, and hopefully, once COVID sort of clears up, you'll see us launching there.
The cost of Spotify is much lower in other countries like India, like Latin America, and the music companies are concerned about devaluing the cost of music. Do you see an opportunity to increase the cost of Spotify in some of the more mature markets like the United States, like we've seen Netflix do?
I think definitely long term, there's that opportunity for us. I think in the near term, though, it's really all about focusing for growth for us. So we talked a little bit about opportunity before, but I can't imagine, uh, you know, this not being a billion user opportunity around the world. And we talked about the US specifically. If you think about all the people who are consuming radio in the US today, it's well north of 80% of the population that are doing that. All of those are moving over online, and that's the opportunity that we're going after. And we still think it's the early days of that. And once you're hitting more of a maturity where it's hard to grow, I think then is where you're looking at price increases. We're just not there yet. Even in what you would call some of the mature markets, we still think that we're still relatively early in that cycle of growth.
Spotify CEO Daniel Ek there. Coming up, would Spotify ever sell to another streaming giant like Netflix? I ask him that question next. More of our exclusive conversation after this quick break. This is Bloomberg. We've heard about how Spotify is evolving its relationship with musicians and running its business through a pandemic. In part 3 of my exclusive conversation with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek, we talked about the company's dispute with Apple and its complaint that Apple is charging too much to be part of the App Store. Take a listen.
Well, I think first and foremost, this is an ongoing complaint in the European Union at this point. So I can't talk too much about the specifics on this. But obviously, long term, we do expect Apple to open up. We're very encouraged about being able to now finally use Siri as a way of just building in voice supports and also being available to build products for the Apple TV and Apple Watch, something that we haven't been able to do until very recently. So I think it's moving in the right direction, but we still have many, many steps to go before we consider this an open and fair platform.
Apple has stopped releasing numbers for Apple Music. Do you think that their growth has slowed, perhaps?
I can't really speak to what their numbers are. My guess would be as much as your guess. What we have, though, is, and we've said this publicly before, we're 2 times the size of our nearest competitor, and we're about 3 times the engagement than our nearest competitor, too. And we think those 2 characteristics means we should be growing a lot faster.
I wonder if you're surprised that Apple hasn't innovated more in an industry that it dominated for so long.
Well, here's just my take. I think, we talk a lot about these big tech companies, and we talk a lot about how you could be very good at building these great companies, and they truly are phenomenal companies with amazing businesses. But I think there is something about focus, and this is something that I've said a long time, that we're unique in the way that we're focusing all of our time and attention on this one opportunity. And it's all about bringing audio onto the internet in a big way and moving it off of linear radio and physical formats. That's what this whole company is focused on, and that means everyone who's passionate about our mission has a sure way of coming here. Like, if you're passionate about music, if you're passionate about audio, Spotify should be the company you want to join.
So let's talk a little bit about the podcast bet. Podcasts are a big bet for you, but this is still a relatively tiny audience. You've bought a number of different podcast companies now. Why do you feel Spotify needs to own podcast companies rather than being a neutral distributor like you are with music?
Well, I think it's a much more nascent marketplace, just in general, than the music industry was. So to your point, I mean, we're early in that journey, even though podcasts have been around for about 20 years. As a business, it's much earlier. It's really the last sort of call it 5 to 10 years, where you've actually seen fully dedicated podcasting companies that have only focused on that with full-time employees. So we're much earlier in that journey, and for us to try to grow this platform, we think it's essential to really drive just the proximity to content creation and distribution much closer. And then I think, just from a strategy perspective, although there will be millions of pieces of podcasts around the world, there will be few that probably are these daily rituals. So for us to be able to build and invest in those properties, we just think it's a much better fit by owning them than perhaps having them just as a third party relationship.
You landed a highly anticipated podcast project with the Obamas. How's it going? When we'll be able to hear it? And what are we going to hear when we hear it?
Yeah, we're super excited about that one. So likely you'll hear more about how's it going already in the next few weeks, and that's at the point where we can unveil more details. As you can imagine, this is one where we're keeping tight lips on exactly what's going on and how it's happening. But I can tell you that it's looking very good, and we're very excited about it.
There are so many different podcasts, and there are plenty of top podcast companies that you don't own. I know you've earmarked like $500 million for podcast acquisitions. Where might we see you acquire, and what's the appetite for more M&A?
We're pretty pleased with the portfolio that we have. To the extent that we would see something that would fit, that would be different than the ones we've already acquired, we would probably take a look, but it would be very much on an opportunistic basis.
Well, the companies you've bought are known for true crime and sports. What other genres are you interested in?
Pretty much all genres. I mean, when you think about the moments of time, like you talked about Spotify Kids, I really do believe that kids drama content will do incredibly well on the service, and it's also something where, if you think historically, it's just not been a category that's been doing that well on radio. So we think that there's a big opportunity in that space. We see in entertainment being a big category, lifestyle and entertainment being, something where our audience in particular are very, very excited about the things that are coming out there. So there will be lots of categories, but some of them we can also handle through our homegrown Spotify studios as well, which is the studio we built out internally as well.
Would you make some of your most popular podcasts exclusive to Spotify or on Spotify first? Let's say like Bill Simmons' podcast, Reply All, or whatever you think your serial is.
Yeah, well, we're opportunistic in figuring out what the right strategy is, whether it's windowing or exclusivities, etc. But we've definitely been experimenting a lot with that. Um, I think what you saw us do in this quarter, for instance, is I think we had about 70 new originals, of which a number of them were actually exclusive to the platform as well. So you should definitely imagine that exclusivities is a big part of our future when it comes to podcasting.
Now, there's also video, and original video on the platform hasn't quite taken off. What kind of experimenting are you doing there to try to make something like that work?
Well, in all honesty, Emily, we experimented a lot with when it came to video a few years ago. Because I think at the time it was less clear how the landscape of video would play out. Are we going to see long form content? Would we see short form content like YouTube, or would we see something in between? And what would that look like? And so we pursued that opportunity, learn a bit. What we really, in the end, ended up with, though, is realizing that our key strategy is really around owning background moments, around owning really audio. And so it actually, more so than anything else, informed us about the strategy on doubling down on audio. And I'm very happy with that today when you look at a lot of these other media companies that have to invest billions of dollars in order to even be competitive with the likes of Netflix or YouTube.
People love to float the idea of Netflix buying Spotify. Would you ever be interested in selling? Is that just ridiculous?
I'm not interested in selling. No. And the reason why is I just feel like we are in this really unique time where, as I mentioned to you, it's probably a once in a generation opportunity that we have in front of us of this enormous consumer shift that are happening when people are choosing whatever they want to listen to whenever they feel like listening to it. They're growing up with new interests. They're, fascinating for me is like we used to talk about the only thing that will work in media was short form content. But we're finding more and more that people are happy to engage an hour and a half to learn about a subject in depth. We were talking about, we can't have a professor in clinical psychiatry talking about a very complicated subject, but it turns out that people are engaging with that, and that's very exciting to me. And that's very much now the journey that Spotify's on. It's not just about entertaining people; it's about informing and educating them as well. And it's rare to be in a situation like that, and I think that's a huge opportunity both for me, for the company in itself, and I think ultimately it will reward the shareholders to go after that opportunity too.
And believe it or not, that's just part of my interview with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek. You can catch the full, wide-ranging conversation later this month in a special edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 and an extended Bloomberg Studio 1.0 podcast. Meantime, coming up, we're going to hit Disney earnings again. The COVID-19 crisis costing the company $1 billion in theme park revenue. We'll tell you how it's all shaking out. The company just concluded their earnings call. We'll have all the headlines for you in just a moment. This is Bloomberg. Recapping Disney's results out after the bell, Disney losing as much as $1.5 billion in profit due to the COVID-19 crisis, most of that being wiped out by theme parks remaining closed around the world. Disney, though, announcing it plans to reopen Shanghai Disneyland on May 11th. That's a small part of its revenue, but certainly a symbolic step forward. They're keeping their fingers crossed for Mulan, a big movie opening scheduled for July, though many movie theaters remain closed. And this was the first earnings call with the new CEO, Bob Chapek, who has certainly a big task ahead of him. Disney Plus streaming showing strong numbers, 54 million subscribers so far there. We're also following Beyond Meat shares spiking after hours after the company reported a profit and revenue of $97 million. A lot of optimism about lab-grown meat right now, especially since we are in the middle of a pandemic. You eliminate some of the safety issues there. Retail sales dominating the bottom line at Beyond Meat. The company saying the crisis is not impacting the supply chain thus far. We'll continue to monitor both of these companies. Also, you can stay tuned for more updates on Bloomberg Daybreak Australia, which starts now. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.